on the website. Welcome to the show, Jack.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yes, and Jack, I read a little bit of your bio, and if you can tell the listener out there a little bit of your background, I would appreciate it. Just tell them what was your first interest in UFOs and what led you to the path that you're on right now.
Sure. I had a lifelong interest in it. I think, like a lot of people, I was just fascinated with the paranormal and the idea of life in space and unidentified flying objects. I was born in Nashville and lived throughout the Southeast, New Orleans, North Carolina, the D.C. area a while. I'm currently residing in Central Florida. And by the 1990s or so, I had began attending the UFO conferences, and I was reading the books, John Mack, Whitley Strieber, just found it fascinating. Felt that I was being open-minded by willing to consider their work and their claims. I attended Bud Hopkins lectures, and I began to feel some disappointment. It began to seem more and more clear that the advertising didn't always live up to what was in these books that were being published, the lectures. The first few times you see these speakers, it's very captivating, very gripping. It can be much less so when you see them 10 years later and it's basically the same presentation. I began to have some doubts, and I was interested enough in the material, Martin, that I dug a little deeper than what would be in the books. I would ask people about what was happening. I was actively attending MUFON meetings, the Mutual UFO Network, and their meetings, and talking to people. And that caused me to become even more concerned about the levels of accuracy that were being reported by some of the researchers, and some of the questions that weren't being asked might be a good way to put it as well. Mm-hmm. And in 2010, I began writing the blog, the UFO Trail, and I made attempts to ask relevant questions, hold people accountable when they didn't want to answer them or wouldn't answer those questions. And I eventually wrote The Graves Have Been Framed due to some of the interactions I had, the things I found. And one of the things that influenced me a lot, Martin, was my path included getting involved with a grassroots nonprofit corporation, and I was doing fundraising work, which I enjoyed and had some success as a grants writer and in nonprofit administration. And that really, I started to see some red flags then in the UFO community of things I found out were standard operating procedures in the nonprofit industry that we aren't seeing in the UFO nonprofit organizations, like transparency about funds and reports and personnel and that kind of thing. And I also came to understand through my grant writing and grant management and reporting on the grants that research projects are specifically structured with budgets and what's expected to be learned, how that information will be disseminated, how it will be measured, what the measurable results are. And at that point, I was becoming very, very disillusioned with the UFO community, and that it seemed that many of its icons and leaders were scrupulously avoiding being accountable for issues such as I just mentioned. And so at that point, I wrote The Graves Have Been Framed, and I addressed issues in which we can see that the intelligence community and questionable writers, questionable researchers have manipulated the topic for reasons that aren't always clear, but it can be documented that various individuals and organizations have attempted to, and successfully, steered the narration, steered the story of UFOs and alleged alien abduction. And I'm not saying that there is nothing, just to be clear up front, I'm not saying that there is necessarily nothing of interest in the UFO community. I think that there may be reports of high strangeness that are of interest. There's certainly, as you and Alejandro were talking to open the show, there's reports of flying objects that at the least do not have available explanations. There's certainly things to be studied. So, and that is an altogether different issue than that we can identify times that the community has been manipulated and given some poor information, and in many cases we continue to celebrate these researchers, that we should be much more critical of their tactics and work that they've published, in my opinion.
What is your opinion for using hypnosis as a tool for retrieving memory from abductees' missing time episodes? I'm relating this to some of the more famous cases, such as Travis Walton or the Allagash abductees. Do you discount their hypnosis memory retrieval as not being relevant or false?
I would not. Gosh, it's not that I would discount it or approve it. It's that it can't be accepted one way or the other. It's just witness testimony like anything else, except while in an even more vulnerable and impressionable state, which makes it even worse. And I was going to mention earlier, Martin, that some of the work of Dr. Julia Shaw and Dr. Elizabeth Loftus, and they have documented repeatedly how the way a question is asked will alter the response, as well as that when you use faulty memory retrieval tools like hypnosis, they're not reliable. We can't count on them. And ironically, people tend, like Donna was getting at, people tend to believe that even more than what they recall without hypnosis, which is really detrimental to a search for truth. So in cases where there's missing time, where people want to fill in the blanks, I can empathize with the desire to use memory retrieval techniques, but we don't have one. Science tells us there's not anything. The memory's more complicated than what the abduction researchers are leading us to believe. In some of those cases, I think something happened. Exactly what, I couldn't say. But like Travis Walton, for instance, is an extremely interesting case in that it differs from some of the others. And we're not talking about a memory that's retrieved and it was 25 or 30 years ago and we really don't even have a date. He had an event that happened in real time that he was missing and went somewhere. So something took place. Now, what that was, I couldn't say, but no, sir, I'm afraid I don't see that hypnosis would be helpful in identifying what that might have been.
Someone up on the message board, and I did talk to Travis about this, but I forgot what he said, but they say that Travis claims that his hypnotic session didn't do anything, didn't add anything to him, to his story. So
that may very well be right correct.
Yeah. Someone wanted to know what you thought about John Mack's work.
I would like to know what John Mack would be saying today. That's what interests me. I really wonder what he would think about where the genre went and what it became, and whose work he would or would not endorse today would be very interesting to me.
Yeah. And I think he was a pretty solid individual. I was really, I wasn't really into this topic when he was around. I was just like way on the outside and peeking in every now and then. But, just from looking back and talking to people about John Mack, he was a brilliant man, for one. And the fact that he took this thing serious is pretty amazing. And it's sad that he took all the trouble that he did when he took it seriously.
Yes, he certainly brought the topic to a wider audience. That's for sure. I'm a little concerned from some things I've read, like C.A. Morgan did a good paper on advocating mental health services as compared to advocating a story or an outcome. And I'm a little concerned about how John Mack would describe the work he did in that way. I'm also a little concerned about, again, we have a circumstance where David Jacobs seems to get the people being sexually abused by aliens. Barbara Lamb seems to get them that are ringing in the evolution of humankind, and John Mack seemed to get them that were spiritually awakening and finding it a kind of a bad medicine that's good for you kind of thing, if I recall correctly from reading his books. So it seems like that in itself is kind of evidence that the investigator is influencing the
Wow.
Either
that or it's a law of attraction.
Right, and that's a good point, that we don't have a conclusive explanation. I really couldn't say, but I would be interested in Dr. Mack, and he was certainly qualified to have opinions on the topics, and I'd be interested what he'd say today about what took place.
Right. I know he interviewed all those kids in the Ariel school incident.
Mm-hmm.
I thought he did a great job then. One of the people out there that really bothers me, and again, they're not here to defend themselves, but is Dr. Stephen Greer. I just have issue with some of the things he's done, and basically, and you're probably really good friends with him or something. But anyway, and that's only because of I think he's abused his popularity and crossed a lot of lines. And you mentioned David Jacobs earlier, and I like David. His personality he's a nice guy. I'm not sure if I agree with things he says, but Greer has done some things that have stepped on some people's toes, I think.
Mm-hmm. I can understand your concern about Dr. Greer. I wrote some blog posts about him over the years, and my concerns about his tactics and his claims that certainly fall under the category of being unverified. And I didn't write about him in my book because it's almost like there's so much to get to that I tried to focus on a few specific circumstances, and I'd completely agree with you that Dr. Greer is more of the problem than the solution, and I just couldn't get to them all. I mean, you know what I mean? It's like it was so conclusively unsubstantiated claims that I almost felt like, wow, this is, like fish in a barrel, so I'll just leave this one go,
Right. So what do you think, we talked earlier about MUFON possibly needing, a cleanup. What do you think needs to happen in the UFO field to get more of, or do you think anything can be done to get more of the straight story, or the people that are really out there really trying to figure out what's going on and are authentic? How do we separate these people? Or I've heard the expression, how do we drain the swamp?
Right. I think that we need to take more personal responsibility, Martin. I think people like you that decide to do a podcast or write a blog or put their thoughts, try to put them cohesively in a book. I think if we like that work, we should support it financially or morally, emotionally. Let those people know. Like I really appreciated Donna's call tonight, because I realize that the material I cover can give people heartburn. I've been there. I have been there. I ended up feeling duped is one of the reasons I cover this material now.
Oh, and talk about that. Why?
Absolutely. Like I said, I went in the 90s and I was fascinated. I bought Bud Hopkins' books. I bought David Jacobs' work. I was like, wow, this is just incredible. And, I attended MUFON and feel very disillusioned when I began. I'll tell you one of the things that bothered me, Martin, one of the things that I couldn't convince myself not to think about. I would leave one of those UFO conventions and you're just pumped up and there's all this emotionalism and you just talk to people all weekend that they've seen them, they've been there, they know, the government's this, the government's that, and listen to this woman that was on the craft and this man that gets telepathic messages, and you leave and it's like, if I just stayed around them all the time, I'd never even doubt it. And then the thing I could never really get out of my mind, though, man, was, but there's really not that one thing you can go to and say conclusively, here's the alien. Here's where the alien was. And how can all these people have so much emotionalism and pump us up like we're at some kind of political rally? Or
religion, someone just wrote on this.
Absolutely, mm-hmm. Absolutely. Religion is a great analogy, and you really don't deliver the goods. When these speakers say they're going to show the proof of this, and they're going to show how the CIA has that, and they don't when it comes right down to it. And I never could completely get that out of my mind. And I wanted to believe Bud Hopkins. I wanted to believe David Jacobs. And I couldn't get out of my mind that there's so much emotionalism and nothing up my sleeve, bait and switch kind of tactics going on, that I thought, well, let me look at it. Let me see. And maybe I'll find out that there's more honesty if you dig deeper. And that's not what I found. And it was disillusioning, and so I know that when I present this material, I know there's a certain percentage of people that turn the channel, that go read something else, and I empathize with that. I just feel like that the world, the universe is an interesting enough place. The moons of Jupiter that are spewing, liquids, geysers, mm-hmm. The unidentified light material on that asteroid, large, dwarf planet. I think in my lifetime they're probably going to find microscopic or microbial life somewhere on a moon or another planet. Mm-hmm. I'd be amazed if there's not life out there. But what I'm advocating is that bearing false witness doesn't bring us any more to the truth. And so back to the question of what could be done, I think take personal responsibility, support the people you think do good work. Don't support the others just because it might be the only game in town in your area for a while. Maybe do some activism and get another game going, get other speakers coming around, maybe advocate for the people that you think do good work. I think we need to reward those that we like their work. We need to boycott those that we don't. And as a collective group, I think we need to do a better job of identifying the difference between claiming to conduct scientific investigation and actually conducting it. And if people aren't claiming it, fine. But if they're claiming to be conducting scientific investigation, they have some questions to answer and some issues to be accountable for, such as measurable results, what they're expecting to find out, and so on.
Mm-hmm. No, I think there are some, we've had a few people on the show that I think are really trying to look at this scientifically in ways such as detection. There's UFO Doug Trumbull, and Mark D'Antonio. And I like Mark. He's funny. People kind of bash him. Now, he's the MUFON video and photo expert, but he basically has the scoop on what pictures are. And I I tested him. There was a picture taken out of my window as I was driving out to Phoenix. I showed him the picture, and there was a little bit of just a little stick on the window. You couldn't really see it, and it looked just like a disc. So I showed him the picture, and in 5 seconds he says, I think there's something on the window. So, there's people like him that really, really look hard, and he's involved in that UFO talk. And then there's another organization that's actually, there's a banner on my website, excuse me, UFO Data. That's another detection and tracking that is trying to take a scientific look to see if they can catch what is going through the sky. The question that popped up on the message board was, do you think that ETs are visiting us?
My personal opinion is no. I don't think so. I don't really have any conclusive
Okay,
reason.
The interview's over.
Right.
No.
Hello. Yeah. I don't know. That doesn't mean I'm right. It just happens to be my opinion. Other people are entitled to theirs. If we can get some proof of it, not just evidence, but proof, great. I'd be the first to respect and recognize. I think that too often, and this is where the intelligence community and the charlatans and the questionable researchers have tainted the well. Too often, we confuse evidence that something took place with evidence of aliens, and we make the assumption that it's ET when the scuffed shoes or the stained dress or the photo of the triangle craft or the radiation that's detected in the trees where the UFO was spotted are not necessarily indicative of an alien presence. Could there have been an ET contact event at some point in humankind's history? Maybe. I don't know. Will there be in the future? Possibly. I of course couldn't say. I just don't know. But I'm really doubtful that such contact events are taking place on a scale of what they're being reported by writers and organizations like MUFON. I'm really skeptical of that. I'd have a hard time accepting that. Do I think that there's something maybe happening on that scale that's more normal than paranormal and we just really haven't recognized it yet? Maybe. And that's where I think science is important to promote rather than come to odds with and do battle with, because it's science that's going to find out more about consciousness, how real are dreams, how real are our thoughts, how much do our thoughts possibly manipulate or affect the material in our surroundings. And so we need to embrace, I think, some of the skeptics, some of the scientists, in the same way we'd embrace the experiencers and the people that were willing to listen to the experiencers and build bridges between those demographics. And that's where I think our real strides are going to come, because if we want to be accepted by mainstream science, or we want to be accepted by the skeptics, then we have to know what they define as acceptable. And that's where we'd have to work with them. And as I mentioned earlier, sources that are recognized as credible by the professional research community. And so we need to embrace those communities, not alienate ourselves from them, I feel.
But what is your thoughts on what the unexplainable cases are?
If I had to venture a guess, Martin, I would say that perhaps some type of telekinetic thing might be going on in some circumstances, that people may be unintentionally manipulating their environment. In other circumstances, if I were to make conjecture on if it is actually an outside non-human intelligence, I like you say, I really couldn't say. If I tried to be imaginative, I'm not so sure it's even extraterrestrial. Like, I've got my doubts about, I think the analogy has been used of how much can the bat in the attic figure out what the house is. I'm not so sure it's extraterrestrial. Squirrels don't.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Back to your suggestion of like some type of created telekinetic situation. What about mass sightings when there's thousands of people or hundreds of people that see the same thing? How could you explain that as something telekinetic?
I think in some circumstances they see something. Of course they do. They film it. They take photographs of it. I don't have any idea what it is. I think we could make some categories, and we could assume some of them are exotic aircraft, classified aircraft. We could go through some of the simple answers like yet to be better understood natural phenomena, such as seem to be happening at Hessdalen and Black Mountain Lights in North Carolina. I think
Mountain.
we could. Yes, Brown Mountain. Thank you, sir. I think we could make some of the simple categories. When it got to speculating about what if they're an actual intelligence, I still think that the extraterrestrial is among the less likely. I tend to think that something that we really have difficulty even comprehending yet, a higher intelligence, a more evolved intelligence, maybe it can even travel extraterrestrially or is just in the fabric of the universe. I of course, am just entirely speculating, but even if it were an outside intelligence, a non-human intelligence, I'm I'd need a lot of information, a lot of conclusive data to be convinced it was a visiting civilization that um, seems to like the most damning thing to the extraterrestrial hypothesis is plain and simply its lack of physical evidence. After all of these, like you say, thousands a year of reported sightings, that for whatever reasons, it seems to fall into high strangeness and paranormal, that there seemed to be such a lack of physical things left in the wake. And I know now we're going to get into debating, the method of operation and all that, but that's just kind of how I look at it, Martin.
Yeah. Well, I had a sighting myself which kind of changed everything about the way I felt. Have you ever had a sighting personally?
I have, Martin. As a youngster, I also have some stories about what we might call ghosts or whatever. As in more recent years, I thought I saw something at a house I lived at, and then when I turned to address it, nothing was there. And at this point, I don't consider them important to the research I conduct and the things I write about. I've become more comfortable over the years with telling myself I don't know what happened. And like I was alluding to earlier, being disillusioned and angry that I felt like there were investigators and people claiming to be qualified to give me information about it, that I think those claims were pretty empty, and that they really didn't know, but seemed to have vested interest in changing my opinions. And again, we could use the religious analogy or the political candidate, that people seem vested in telling you it was ET or ghosts or you said it was a multi-person sighting. I lived in Charlotte, North Carolina around the time you may have heard of the Snoopy 2 case. And
no.
It was fairly well known, as these things go. Snoopy was the name of a police helicopter, and these policemen got in somewhat of a dogfight with two objects that they couldn't identify, and they had them on radar at the control tower, and it was a well-documented case, very, very solid case, that pretty much all you can do is shrug your shoulders and say, we don't know what they saw. I mean, that's pretty much the only explanation is no explanation. So again, like we talked about at the beginning, I think there's a lot of solid work that could be done. I'm not sure how exactly we can get at answers of old cases like that, but
right.
I certainly am not here to tell anybody what they did or didn't see. I'm just advocating that we don't jump to conclusions and insert explanations when they're not entirely available yet.
Right. Someone wanted to know, is that actually the sighting you had?
I don't know, because I was a child, and in my memory it's kind of confused now. Mm-hmm. I can remember when I have a memory, let me put it that way, of seeing something at night in my backyard in Charlotte, but my memory of when that happened doesn't line up entirely with the Snoopy 2 sighting, but I do remember the Snoopy 2 being a big deal and hearing about it and reading about it. So it's kind of like trying to straighten out, was that Christmas when you were 10 or when you were 12 in your memory,
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And so I'm not sure, honestly.
Okay. Up on the message board, there's some people that I'm just going to say it. Some people think you're closed-minded and, that type of thing. But another post came up on the other side saying, I think he is saying he just doesn't know. Obviously, he's interested in the subject. Just saying the research needs to be better. Does that kind of encapsulate?
That would absolutely be correct. I'm not telling you what you didn't see or what you did see. I'm saying that if we can't identify it, then we can't identify it. We don't know what it was.
Okay. So what do you think that needs to change for people doing research on this subject?
I think that we need, those of us that are writing about it, I think we need to be more responsible in separating our facts from our opinions. We can cite facts and then we can explain in our opinion what we think that indicates. I think as consumers, we need to take more responsibility in supporting the people that we think do a good job of that and not supporting those that we think do not do a good job of it. To those that feel like I was closed-minded, I appreciate that you've heard me out and that you stuck with us the whole show. I appreciate that. And I am completely open to credible and responsible research. I just, as I mentioned earlier, I have a pet peeve that if people claim to be conducting scientific investigation, they have responsibilities to remain in certain parameters. And we're not responsible that they make that claim. If they make that claim and then they are not conducting scientific investigation by definition, I think we have the right as well as the responsibility to call them on it, especially when people are getting harmed and hurt in the process.
Right. So where can someone find go ahead and give out your website name, and your book is right on your website too, right?
Sure. Thanks for asking. I write the UFO Trail. That's a blog, the UFO Trail. It's a Google blog, ufotrail.blogspot.com. And my book is, you can click right on it. It's in the right sidebar. It's also available on Amazon, Books A Million, or Barnes & Noble if you prefer PayPal. The Grays Have Been Framed, Exploitation in the UFO Community. And thanks again for having me, Mark.
You're very welcome.
I really appreciated you being a hospitable host.
Thanks very much.